And we are back here on Metalholic Radio, and you just heard I Like My Music Loud from Skull. And joining us tonight, we have the madman behind the skull, guitarist and producer extraordinaire, and the fifth Kiss, Bob Kulick. How are you doing?
Hey, thanks so much for having me today. Really appreciate it, Rustin.
Oh, we're absolutely thrilled to have you. I've been wanting to talk to you for I don't know how long, and I actually had the opportunity to meet you one time. It was April 1989, backstage at the Omni in Oakland on Paul Stanley's solo tour. So I remember.
Wow, so what happened? Tell me the story.
I remember it well. You certainly wouldn't remember little old me, but
was I at least nice?
Oh, you were wonderful. Paul was wonderful. Everybody in the band was wonderful. I was hanging out with my good friend Brian Brinkerhoff from Kerrang! Magazine at the time. He was sort of giving me my wheels on becoming a rock music journalist, and here I am, still at it all these years later, and here you are still at it all these years later. So there's so much to talk about. I don't even know where to start because you've done so much with so many. I said the other day, you and Steve Lukather are like the Michael Caine and Gene Hackman of rock and roll. Between the two of you, I think you've played on half the records ever made. So.
Well, it sounds like it's going to be a walk down memory lane.
Yeah, well, as I said, I am a huge music history buff, so any little tidbit I can get here and there, I'm thrilled for. So,
well, the '89 tour was definitely something special. In retrospect, it's too bad we didn't do more. In retrospect, it's too bad that we didn't do a video, because there would have been people today who would have been lining up to buy it.
Absolutely.
And when I hear or see the videos or hear some of the board mixes or recordings that people send me, I'm reminded how good a band it was. Even the photos show a very unique-looking band. That was the first time that Eric Singer ever played with Paul. And so there was the entree into Kiss that was presented unknowingly at that moment.
Right.
And as fate would have it, I'm going to be appearing with Eric Singer at the Kiss Mini Golf anniversary event on March 23rd coming up in Las Vegas. So it'll be our reunion.
Nice. Well, and you just played with a few months ago with him and Gene and your brother and everything at another
Correct.
event. So
that was yet another one of those. Played with Paul, got up on stage and played with Gene and Eric and Bruce and all of that. So, these are the moments that one craves, to make the circle complete, so to speak,
There you go. Hence and I'm sure all fans who know who you are clearly know the connection with Kiss that's gone on throughout the years. But let's go all the way back before Kiss and Lou Reed and Alice Cooper. How did you get started on guitar, and when was that moment of epiphany for you when you knew that this was your path?
Well, the learning of the guitar was simply a family function where my female cousin Judy played folk music on acoustic guitar, and my mother looked at me and was like, "Why can't you do something like that?" And so taking up the challenge, whilst being fascinated with the idea of a guitar, jumped in the pool, and once your fingers start to work and you see that all of a sudden you have a proclivity, shall we say, my 25-cent word for today, in that area, not recognized yet as the gift, as I refer to it now. I was given a gift, just didn't recognize it as a gift at the time, and became infatuated with music. I was lucky enough to be brought up in New York, where they would have these Murray the K shows. Murray the K was one of the big DJs at the time. He was a disc jockey who played all the current hits. He picked the hits. He made stars. He was one of the foremost advocates of the Beatles. He was the fifth Beatle in his own way. A vaudevillian guy who had a great sounding voice, who could dance with the best of the black acts, would put on a show 3 or 4 times a year where I was actually able to see the top of the food chain acts perform right in front of my face. So with that injection of rock and roll, seeing all those acts play, and the ability for me to all of a sudden feel like, you know what, I feel good when I play guitar. This does it for me, put me in a position where I was able to take advantage of what became a gift that I had to accept.
And of course, your brother Bruce followed suit. Did you pass that on to him, or did he come into it on his own?
Monkey see, monkey do. I think he saw that this was something that, was special, and that if I could do it, he could do it, and we could do it together. And so, he embarked upon the bass first and then switched over to guitar. And, as history would have it, the first Meatloaf band featured the two of us.
Exactly.
We were the guitar players in that Meatloaf band. And that was a defining moment for both.
Yeah, I mean, the 70s alone were such a heady time. You toured with Alice, Meatloaf, with your brother, obviously. You recorded studio tracks for Kiss Alive 2, Paul's solo album. What were some of your standout memories from that period?
Well, obviously the rags to riches Meatloaf story, and because it was so dramatic and traumatic at the same time, best of times, worst of times, be careful what you wish for. We went from being booed off the stage, opening up for Cheap Trick, to being the biggest band in the world. When we landed in Australia, the album was number one. When we landed in Europe, the album was number one. We were the kings. The band that broke through that year, that went from nothing to superstardom. It was an incredible ride. The problem was that the singer himself, being thrust into the limelight like this under these circumstances, made for a lot of pressure that it's very difficult for anyone to handle.
Right.
Certainly, the band had its share of trying to handle that kind of stardom and fame thrust in front of you, the singer and the writer, tenfold. And so, as history records, once that tour was over and the break was taken and the second record was about to be recorded, the roof fell in and the man could not sing anymore, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It turned into an absolute nightmare. We had, a great opportunity being on Saturday Night Live, touring the world, playing with somebody who became a superstar overnight. I went back after the fact and in '83 rejoined the band.
Right.
Played Donington and Networth and all the big festivals that I dreamed about playing, all the big heavy metal festivals sandwiched in between my idols. When we played Donington, all the people that I subsequently worked with as a producer, Ronnie Dio, may you rest in peace. Dio played '83 Donington.
Right.
Dee Snider, Twisted Sister, produced Dee Snider's Dee Does Broadway record. Still working with Dee Snider. There was Dee Snider. Twisted Sister was on that bill. Billy Gibbons, ZZ Top. We went on right after ZZ Top. Billy Gibbons was on that bill. Worked with Billy Gibbons several times in the recent past. So all of it has rhyme and reason to it. Somehow, when it's revealed as to the reason that a lot of the compilation records that I was able to do were able to be done at all were because half the musicians I had met as a touring guitar player playing with Meatloaf, or playing with Paul Stanley, or playing with somebody else. So they all knew me as a player and could feel comfortable that they were dealing with a musician, not somebody who was just, quote, a producer.
And you've done some incredible tribute albums, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but let's obviously go back to the legendary story, and I'm sure you've probably told this story more times than Gene Simmons checks his net worth, but take us back to that day in January '73 when you auditioned for Kiss. What was that like? Give us some fly-on-the-wall insight and trivia, if you will. Well,
it was simply the band advertised in the Village Voice that they were looking for a lead guitar player for a, quote, Led Zeppelin-style band. So I showed up at their loft, and Gene and Paul and Peter were there, and we jammed on a few different things. And while we were jamming, one of the other guitar players who was going to audition came in and sat down, and Gene asked the guy to get out while we were playing. And subsequently to that, I found out that that was actually Ace that had come in after me. A couple of weeks later, Paul called and said, you're a great guitar player, you play great, you're probably the best guitar player we saw, but the guy that came in after you kind of fits in with the band better, so I think we're going to go with him, but I'd like to keep in touch with you. And so we kept in touch, and I would go to their shows, and became friends with Gene and Paul, and when they needed my services, I was there for them. Well, it's funny they said a Zeppelin-type band, and I know Paul's a big Zeppelin fan, but
you go back and listen to their Wicked Lister stuff and some of their early stuff, and I always heard more of a Beatles influence than a Zeppelin influence.
Yeah, I think it was, they were looking for Jimmy Page is what they were looking for.
Gotcha.
And that's what they really meant. And to Ace's credit, you know, his style was a sort of, you know, I say this with reverence, a sloppy Jimmy Page.
That about sums it up. Phenomenal guitar player, but always a little loose and wild. And
yeah, exactly.
So, and then you also got to tour in the '70s for a while. I think filling in for Steve Hunter, if I remember correctly, with Alice Cooper, and I believe Dick Wagner's an influence of yours, somebody you really look up to and respect. But what was that like, getting to tour with Alice?
Well, that was just one of those being in the right place at the right time and having the stars all aligned, which is what happens sometimes when you're given this gift. Part of the gift is that, you know, I know this sounds far-fetched and, you know, sort of cosmic, but, you know, the music gods kind of have a way of sorting things out, and winding up in the studio with Dick Wagner, hitting it off with Dick Wagner, him asking me if I would play with him because we just hit it off, him knowing that Steve Hunter was going off to play with Peter Gabriel, you know, do you want to come and do this tour with Alice Cooper? It was like, are you kidding me? You know, it was just a dream come true, you know, to back up Alice Cooper, but also to play with somebody who I totally respected, looked up to, and who taught me so much about music that I can only say great things about the guy.
And then you got the opportunity, the Kiss connection again, to do, I think you played on three of the tracks, the studio tracks on Alive 2, and add your skills to it. And at the time, because Ace was still obviously in the band, they wanted you to emulate Ace's style. How is that as a guitar player? How do you go in and emulate somebody else's style? Is that something that's easy for you to do, or?
One could say that I'm adept at picking out the nuances that would lead one to believe that was the person that was playing. In this case, anybody who knows, listening to what I played in certain spots, could never think that was Ace because it was nothing like him, whereas some of the other stuff I could see as viable as Ace. So it was sort of a mixed bag of what their opinion was of what he was capable of doing, and less my, I'm trying to be Ace.
And then, of course, a couple of years later, you got to do the 4 studio tracks on the Kiss Killers album, where they kind of let you do your own thing, right?
Well, I wouldn't say that. I would say that it was probably more controlling in that, you know, they were trying at that point to modernize the sound of the band because of the advent of Eddie Van Halen, etc. And hence, you know, using the Wang Bar Partners in Crime and allowing for the overbends and Nowhere to Run. You know, I was given some leeway to try and, shall we say, update the vibe, but they were always, both Gene and Paul were extremely opinionated, rather, and, you know, where one would give the thumbs up sign, the other would give the thumbs down sign. So there were times when it was like, Gene, I like that. Paul, not for me. You know, and I'd have to try again. You know, so, you know, it was a mixed bag. Part of me was becoming a session player, and so it was good experience to have no ego about what you're playing and try to resort to, quote, please the client.
And you did great work on those, but I really love the stuff that you did on Paul's solo album. That was my favorite of the 4 solo albums, and that was a weird time for Kiss anyway. I mean, the 4 solo album thing had a lot to do with some of the cracks starting to show in the band, if I remember. What was it like for you actually doing that solo album with Paul?
It was a blast, actually. You know, the first half done in New York with a really great vibe, just setting up. I remember we just set up at Electric Lady, and he asked me to suggest Electric Lady Studios. They asked me to suggest a bass player, and I grabbed the guy, Steve Buslow, was the guy that I was playing with Meatloaf, and we just went in, and it was just like, he played some really great songs for us. We just whipped them up and recorded them. The second half, done in California, took 10 times as long. There was too many distractions out here, and the vibe was different. But all in all, there was a great experience, and I thought, for whatever it was worth, people's response to my playing on the record was just overwhelmingly positive. And, you know, magazine articles where somebody would write, now we know what Kiss would sound like if he were the guitar player, meaning me, it was what more could I say? I played my heart and soul out because he let me. It wasn't a Kiss record. It was just like, on your mark, get set, do you.
And like I said, it turned out really well. So in the 80s, you had your own band with Pepe Castro, Balance, and then, of course, you and Bruce worked again briefly on Michael Bolton's debut album. What was that like with Balance? Why didn't that work out? And what was it like working with Bruce on the Michael Bolton album?
Well, we actually didn't. I found Michael Bolton, who was a rock singer from Connecticut.
Right.
And did a bunch of shows, and he had a bunch of solo record deals as Michael Bolton. And none of it worked. And changed his name to Michael Bolton and tried again with a couple of rock records, which also didn't work. Just didn't work. Until he became a pop singer. And How Am I Supposed to Live Without You and the R&B songs that he wrote changed people's perception of him from a rock guy to a pop singer, and the rest is history.
Which is too bad, because I like those two rock records.
Yeah, the label was so guarded of him as a pop artist that they discontinued print of the rock records and probably would deny they even existed. It was totally, anti what they were trying to project of him. And here's somebody who could sing the phone book, and he was forced to sing a different phone book than the one he wanted to sing.
Right. And you did 3 albums with Balance, right? Because didn't you guys put out another one just a few years ago?
Yeah, why somebody would ask a failed band to do a reunion record is beyond my comprehension. But I took the opportunity with the other guys in good faith to try to make some music and have some fun, which is always my intention, put the ball in play. Being a big sports guy, nothing can happen unless you put the ball in play. So, gave it another shot, with the same result. The intention was good. The result was still not the result that I wanted. If there's anything that I regret in my career, it's that I was never in one band like that just worked the way I wanted it to work. Obviously I worked with platinum artists that it did work for, that I worked with. That's a whole other issue. But for Balance and Skull and Murderer's Row and here the other incarnations of whatever it was I tried, the music gods just didn't deem them worthy, so they didn't work.
And that's the thing I found interesting. I mean, in the 90s, the Skull album came out, and a lot of that was bad luck and timing, too, because if I remember correctly, back when you guys were going to release the Skull album, if I remember, the record label went under, and then you ended up putting it out on a different record label like a year later or whatnot. But that was a great album. You did the Blackthorn album with David Glenn Isley and good old Jimmy Waldo from New England and Alcatraz. And then you did... wait a minute, did I get him backwards? That was Murderer's Row. Blackthorn was with Graham Bonnet and also Jimmy Waldo. So
Jimmy Waldo in both cases, Graham Bonnet and David Glenn Isley in the other 2 cases.
Right.
Correct, yeah. I mean, it's not for lack of trying. I tried and tried and tried, and Andy Newmark and Willie Weeks and Frankie Benally and Chuck Light and all the great players that we used, Dennis St. James and Chuck Berkey and all the great guys that played on the records of where I tried to have bands, they all went on to great success because every single one of them was a great player and or singer. And for those bands, it just didn't work. David Glenn Isley and I had more success doing SpongeBob than we ever did being in a band together.
Isn't that sad? But you're so extraordinary at what you do, both as a guitar player and a producer, and that if I had to say there was anything tragic about any of this is that you should be out there. You should be much more well-known because you've been involved in so many great things, and you are such an incredible player. And you brought all of that to these tribute albums that you've spent the last decade or so doing so many great tribute albums. Why do you do them, and what's the process like of putting them together? Because you bring together a ton of incredible performers on these projects.
That's the only reason to do them is the combinations of actually introducing people to each other that would never have played together before. To me, seemed like a really smart handle on how to present some cover songs, essentially. The Christmas record that I did a few years ago, to be able to get Billy Gibbons, Dave Grohl, and Lemmy to be a band on one song, but it's just incredible to be able to meld together, you know, the late, great Ronnie Dio, Tony Iommi, Rudy Sarzo, and Simon Wright from Dio, and the other guys from Heaven and Hell, to meld them together into a band so that, you know, the world could hear, well, what would that sound like? Wow, check that out. You know, that to me is the great part of it, you know, Ingve playing with Ripper Owens, and then I go to the show where they're playing together. How did they meet? Ripper sang on the track that Ingve played guitar on one of my records. So I made so many intros for people that had never met each other. It became the big joke, you know, that I could virtually get anybody, and to have somebody like Roger Daltrey show up at the studio to sing a song, and to be able to work with somebody like Slash and be able to, dude, you're not done playing yet. I need a solo at the end. but, just play your ass off. Come on. You know, that's what makes it worthwhile. You know, the songs themselves are irrelevant. The artists that attributed Queen and Aerosmith and the rest, they all deserved to have worthy artists do their songs. And the way I did them, rather than getting bands, although we did that a few times, won a Grammy for getting a band to cover another band's song. Motorhead covering a Metallica song, won a Grammy for me. And it was great for the band that Whiplash, a song that Metallica wrote thinking about Motorhead, re-recorded by Motorhead, then won a Grammy for them. You know, still in all, putting together Lemmy, Dave Grohl, and Billy Gibbons was more exciting.
Yeah, you know? and you bring in some interesting combinations. I mean, I look back at the Kiss one, Spin the Bottle, Steve Lukather and Tommy Shaw on Love Gun, and you wouldn't think that is going to work, and you listen to it, and now I can't listen to the original version. I have to hear that one, the way Lukather did the guitars, and which is funny because I talked to him a couple months ago, and he doesn't even remember doing it. He says, I just shot in and shot out, so...
Yeah, he's a total, you know, he just reacts to what he hears, and because he's got the Uber gift, you know, some of us just got the gift, but that's the Uber gift. You know, I mean, the guy is beyond an amazing guitar player, you know, I mean, there's an aura around him that he goes into a almost trance-like state, and he just dishes it out like a plate of spaghetti. You know, it's just the most amazing thing. Some people, you know, you see it clearly that, you know, they're blessed in a way that very few people are.
Right. Well, and that was the other question I had with the tributes and stuff is, how do you know, I mean, do you let them pick, or do you have in mind who to pick for which song because you think it'll work a certain way?
There have been instances where an artist will request a song, or like in Lemmy's case, where it's like, well, there's 3 songs I would do, so any one of those 3 will work, and then we'll pick one. You know, the rest of it is all on us. You know, my partner, Brett Jason, and I, we have a good handle on how to match people up and what the audience would find of interest and what the musicians would find of interest. I want to appeal to everybody. I want the product something that's worth listening to, and to the audience to be excited by who they're hearing playing a song that they've already heard played by the attributed artist, or in this case, say a Christmas song. Well, what did these guys do to Run, Rudolph, Run? You know, Dave Grohl, Lemmy, and Billy Gibbons. What did they do to it? You know, well, there it is. You know, to make it so that it's something, wow, it's pretty cool, isn't it? Yeah, and that's what it's about. You know, it's all about the music. So 100 years from now, you know, somebody listening to this, you know, I want them to look at me like Beethoven. You know, somebody who was able to have foresight, somebody who was able to put together the best talent of his generation.
And you absolutely did. And you do some the Butchering the Beatles was phenomenal. You did the Sinatra metal tribute a year or 2 ago. This year, I believe it's Michael Jackson. What's going on with that?
It's taken a while because there are few volunteers for these songs. They're hard songs to sing. There are people that, you know, have a problem with, shall we say, Michael's former lifestyle. But having said that, we have some of the top of the food chain people on here, and the songs sound totally faithful and yet completely different at the same time. Yep, that's Thriller. Yep, that's Rock With You. Yep, that's whatever song you're hearing. Black and White. Yep, that's Billie Jean, but with Corey Glover and with John from Seven Dust and Chuck Billy and Paul Diano and the other cast of characters that we have on there, Phil Campbell and Bumblefoot and my brother and Rudy Sarzo and Billy Sheehan and Doug Aldrich. You know, there's some amazing players and singers on there, And it's like the other records, you know. It's like people will be shocked that we were able to take some of these songs, you know, Bad and Beat It obviously were already a little rocked up. You know, we just made them heavier than they ever were. So it's been fun. It's been taking a while, and actually Chris Jericho's coming in tomorrow to sing Dirty Diana.
Nice. Fozzy.
So yeah, you know, try to spread the insanity around a little bit here, you know.
Beautiful. So is there a chance we're actually going to get to see it this year then?
Yeah, it's almost done. We're getting. I'm going to be purchasing the pink ribbon to, you know, to tie when it's all finished there to send off to the label. You know, I'm going to wrap it up nice for him. We're just a couple of people short, and then we'll be done.
Perfect.
Almost, yeah.
Well, before we get out of here, a couple more quick ones. You recently been working on some other albums that are non-tribute albums. You did the Brute Force album. You're working on the new Edge of Paradise album. What else is going on in your world?
There's a band called Dirty Eyes. It's a band from Los Angeles that we've been working on their record as well. A really good band. There's a band from Australia that came all the way here from Perth named Diamond Eye. We produced a 16-song CD for them recently. We have a couple of other bands that are about to be coming into the studio that we're going to be working with as well. And, you know, we always are looking for new talent because new talent is how the business survives.
Right.
Somebody will ultimately have to take the place of the bands that are there now. So always looking for new talent. There's this phenomenal kid guitar player, Nick Kai, who I've become friendly with, and he's putting a band together, and I think we're going to do some recording with him. So, you know, always looking for new things to do, new challenges, you know, like the Sinatra thing, like the Michael Jackson thing. Writing a bunch of songs, want to try to be more proactive on the writing rather than just arranging, and like on Dee's record, just adding the frames to otherwise composed songs.
Right.
It's really fun doing the show with him in Vegas this past September, getting up there and playing Sweeney Todd and Mac the Knife and some of those songs done up as the rock metal versions of those songs that we did, along with some of Dee's hits and Twisted Sister songs. It was great to get up on stage and play in front of 5,000 people again. I have to confess, you know, part of me that misses that woke up that night. You know, it was, you know, after not being on stage for so long, when you become somebody else, you forget that the greatest, you know, energy, the greatest charge you can get, the highest you can get, is the high you get from being on stage like that. You forget, you know. So I walked on that stage, and it hit me after all those years of not doing it, not playing in front of thousands of people, how much adrenaline and how much of a high that kind of feedback is when people cheer like that and are going crazy because of what you're doing. There's nothing that could ever replace that. And it was such a magical moment for me that night. I don't think my feet ever touched the ground. And if you go online and you look at the YouTube videos where you see the pictures, you can see the joy on my face from being able to do that, you know, because as a producer, it's a whole other world.
Right.
I can fix it, can always go again, can always, you know, punch in, edit, do whatever. A live performance is not that. It's the antithesis to that. There, then it's gone. And the ability to be able to get up there and have fun entertaining people, I'd forgotten that part of the program. And now it's so vivid in my mind that it's helping me to continue making great music.
Well, Bob, I want to thank you for all the music that you've given us, whether through your bands or through your producing, all the projects and stuff you've done over the years. I've known your name since the 70s, and I'm honored to get a chance to talk with you, honored to have been able to listen to your music and everything you've done. And
I'm so thankful that Metalholic thought me worthy to do this, Rustin. I have to say, you know, it's a great honor always to, you know, to have somebody know your history, and you know, I never, ever take it for granted. I'm a humble person. You know, it's about the music for me. It's not the recognition factor. It's not.
Well, I would still love to see you have that Uber band here. You're still young. You've still got a chance to get that happening, but.
Well, let's see what happens. Let's see what fate has in store.
So last question then. You've worked with so many great artists over the years. Is there anyone you'd still like to work with?
Well, I think, you know, the right answer for that is that my brother and I have been talking about doing something, And, I'm hoping that the threat turns into a promise real soon.
That would be absolutely awesome. Bob Kulick, producer, guitar player, all-around great guy. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. It's an honor, and hopefully we'll get a chance to do it again. Maybe next time we'll talk sports. Who knows? And we'll look forward to you and your brother doing something, because that would truly be something special.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your intelligent questions. I really appreciate it. Thank you all. Keep on middling out.